troglodytes, if you ever had road rage and you just want to absolutely fucking T-bone that guy who's running through the red light, you know, maybe somebody cuts you off in traffic so you just want to pull a fat pit maneuver on them, well, you can't do those in real life, at least not legally, but you can do them in Wreckfest, which is the game we're going to talk about today. You know, Wreckfest has been out on various consoles for a while now. It has gotten recently a Switch port, and most recently it's gotten a phone port, which is super interesting. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The iPhone version of Wreckfest compared to the PC version. So let's go! Alrighty then, so the first thing I want to talk about is the pre-order experience for this game. You know, the first thing you do when you start the game is it will download all the extra assets, like the App Store versions, I don't know,
1.5 gigabytes
or a couple of gigabytes, and it downloads 3.6 gigabytes of extra assets. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that, that's totally fine. And then, you know, you'll launch the game. Oh, whoopsies. Then you launch the game, you're like, okay, okay, let's play the game now. Okay, it crashed. Let's try that again. Okay, that's not working. Let's just keep trying here. Yeah, it's not working. Yeah, this is why you don't pre-order stuff. You know, I pre-ordered this game, so I was like, holy crap, I want to make a video about this. You know, Wreckfest on iOS, it's going to be so friggin' cool. But, like, this is the experience you're gonna get most of the time. You're just gonna get a buggy, broken mess. So, don't pre-order stuff, guys. Alright, so some of the main differences between the PC version and the phone version is that on the phone version, a lot of these textures and assets are really compressed to save on detail, to save on storage space. So notice here this woman is, like, basically just a whole bunch of pixels. She's so blocky, like the compression is so extreme. It's just these weird blocks of color. But you know, from a distance, when you're actually playing the game, you can tell that those are people and that they do exist, so that's fine. Again, here on the grass, if you look at the grass, it's really blocky, compressed, and a very low resolution asset. Whereas on the PC, it's nice and high resolution, it looks very nice. The PC has grass, which the phone version just doesn't, which is interesting. If we look at these trees here, there's more detail here in the PC. It looks better. Oddly enough, the skybox is basically the same in all three of these. You know, the clouds look the same. That texture is pretty much the same, which is interesting, which is very interesting. All right, so if we look at another texture comparison here, you know, on the PC version, you have a lot more memory to work with, you have a lot more storage space, you have a lot more RAM, you have a lot more video memory. So you can get away with these high quality assets without worrying about performance. Whereas on phones, they have very limited amounts of RAM, very limited amounts of storage, and especially extremely limited amounts of memory bandwidth. And especially in a game like this where it doesn't have a streaming system, just all the assets are loaded in. You know, the whole map is loaded into memory and you just drive around the track. You know, if you want to fit all of these different assets into memory, you're going to have to compress them as much as possible, which is clearly what we're seeing here. Alrighty, then looking at the actual car models in more detail, you can kind of see, I mean, they're not the same because, you know, the starting grid is different. If you kind of like look at these fenders here, you can kind of see that the PC version, it looks, the lines are smoother, there's more geometric detail there. But I mean, it's fairly subtle, like the actual asset quality on the cars looks good, because those are what we're going to be staring at the whole time. You know, here the road texture isn't actually as compressed. So the thing you're actually going to be staring at isn't going to be as compressed on the phones. It's still going to be a lower resolution, but it's, you know, going to look decent at least. Interestingly enough, on all versions, the crowds and these kind of other assets are just 2D billboards. They're just like textures that just kind of rotate the face of the camera. Because again, like, why spend all this, you know, geometry budget on stuff you're not really going to be focusing on anyway, right? That makes perfect sense. Again, if you look at these trees in the background, the complexity of the assets, they're fairly similar. You know, it's just if you take two pieces of paper and you just kind of make them into an X formation, that's kind of what they look like. But again, the actual quality of the assets is a lot higher. Like the actual resolution of the assets is a lot higher on the PC version, as we've covered in detail. So if we zoom out, look at the bigger picture here, we can see in the PC that foliage actually has like shadows now, and have of a much higher fidelity than on the phone versions, which makes sense. On the phone version, the tracks are just lined with these really low quality assets, but for the platform, it kind of makes sense, I suppose. You know, all the trees actually have some volume to them. They have some, substance. They aren't these weird, super low quality assets. The grass really helps to fill out the scene. And in this scene here, you can see kind of much further out into the distance. And again, like all the really distant details we've seen before looks similar. It looks fine. But again, the PC just has way more shading. It has a nice bloom effect. The motion blur looks better. It looks of a much higher quality. One thing that is fairly similar is the shadow cast by the vehicle looks pretty much the same on the high settings on all these 3 different versions of the game, which is nice. So, when you're actually playing the game and focusing on, driving around and doing all that kind of good stuff, you're not really going to be super focused on, the trackside detail. Oh, where's the grass? Oh, that tree doesn't look very good. No, you're going to be focusing on driving the car and trying not to get absolutely obliterated by your opponents. So the presentation that does survive in the phone versions, while severely compromised in pretty much every area, the shading's not as good, the lighting's not as good, the assets are of a lower quality, the textures are of a lower quality. That's not really, it doesn't really matter all that much. The experience you do get is a pretty good one. And these are just the sacrifices you need to have a good mobile experience. So here's a replay recorded on my iPhone X running at 30 frames per second. And even though, the resolution's compromised, the graphics are compromised, you're still getting the full Wreckfest experience, and you're still getting up to 23 AI competitors. You're still getting the full physics model, the full damage model. Stuff is flying everywhere, tires are flying everywhere. Cars are crashing into each other. The cars will still deform. And you see all this crap is flying everywhere. It's freaking awesome. It's still full contact, just awesome racing. So yeah, like even if, you don't have the best graphics, take that sign. So yeah, so even if you don't have the best graphics, the gameplay is still really, really fun. And this is what happens at the end of the race if everyone just freaking runs head on into this wall right here for some reason. And yeah, it's visually compromised, but the core gameplay is still intact. Alright, taking a look at the most comparable settings, mostly the lowest settings of the PC version versus the highest settings, most part, of the phone version. Now, one weird thing they did with the phone version is they only included MSAA anti-aliasing, which if you know anything about graphics is really heavy because it's basically super sampling all the edges. So it's a really expensive form of AA. I mean, sure, it's really effective, but why did they put that in the phone? I don't know. That's friggin' weird. The other benefit you get with having such a little amount of assets and such compressed assets is that it loads way faster on the phone, which is super interesting compared to the PC version. Loading times are really quick. And then here we are in actual gameplay again. See, on the PC we have shadows on the trees. Like even on the lowest settings, the PC still looks a fair amount better than the phone version. Like the trees are still nice and full. The LOD, the level of detail is still much higher for most assets. The lighting is still better. So yeah, I just think it's interesting to compare the lowest settings of the PC version with the highest settings of the phone version, just to see like how deep are the cuts really. And yeah, they are pretty darn deep on the phone, but again, it's not that terrible. It's still a playable experience on both platforms, but it could be better. Alright, so for my optimized settings, I would recommend 60 frames per second if you have a fast phone, 30 frames per second if you have a slow phone. For screen scaling, that's basically the resolution that the game runs at. So I would recommend the ultra setting for that because that's one tick down from the maximum,
It'll look basically the same. It'll save you some performance. If you need to save more performance, you can keep turning that down as needed. Dynamic resolution is an interesting one. Dynamic resolution will cause the game to drop in resolution if it needs to maintain the frame rate. I would recommend the balanced setting here. The performance setting basically just runs the game at the lowest resolution scaler possible at all times. So if you need more performance, you can do that. For shadow quality, I would recommend the medium setting. Again, that's basically looks very similar to the high setting, a little bit worse, but you save some performance there. For motion blur, vignetting, and sharpening, you can do whatever the hell you want with that. I don't care. For MSAA, I would leave that off unless you hate jagged edges, and then turn it up to 2x maximum, because 4x is stupid on a phone, and they should have just had FXA in there instead. And then lastly, for bloom, you can turn that on, turn that off, it's your preference. Alright, Wreckfest on iOS. It's a good port. Sure, it's visually compromised, but again, you're running this on a phone, right? Even the fastest smartphones on the market are still nowhere near as powerful as a computer. Sure, the SoC in this thing is insanely fast for phone tasks, but when you compare this to a computer, it's not great. So that's why the game is so compromised. But all the physics are there. As you saw, we're smashing through billboards, we're smashing through tires, we're smashing through enemies. Stuff is flying everywhere. Bits and pieces are, flying everywhere. It's friggin' awesome. All of that survived here. So if you have to severely compromise the graphics to get enough resources freed up for all the physics, I'd say that's a worthy compromise in my book. So I'm pretty happy with the phone version. It can run well. It can run up to 60 frames. It's fairly customizable. The settings, it's not as scalable as you would expect. But, it's already running at far lower than the lowest settings on the PC, so I don't know how much lower they can scale the graphics. Eventually they're going to remove all the trees and assets altogether, right? So yeah. It's a good game. I would recommend it. I would recommend waiting a little while longer for them to patch some more of the bugs, because there's still a few problems with the game. But you're gonna have a lot of fun. If your phone is the only way you can play these games, it's a good port. At least on iOS. I don't know about Android. So yeah. Bye.